You know that moment when someone's poor decision-making comes back to bite them in the ass, and you get to watch it happen in real time? That's exactly what happened when Director Blake Hammond stormed into my office 2 weeks ago, face red as a fire truck, demanding to know why I hadn't fixed an outage that brought down half of Sage Techco's infrastructure. The beautiful irony? He'd personally cancelled my training budget just 14 days earlier, declaring it not mission critical with the kind of corporate smugness that makes you want to document everything for posterity. I'm Claire Johnson, Senior Network Engineer at Sage Techco, and I've been keeping their digital house from burning down for the past 4 years. It's the kind of job where you're invisible when everything works and suddenly everyone's best friend when it doesn't. The company runs on a complex web of legacy systems that would make a museum curator weep, ancient servers held together with prayer and electrical tape, networking protocols that predate the Obama administration, and security patches that get applied when we have time, which translates to never in corporate speak. Sage Tech Company started as a small consulting firm in the early 2000s, back when having a website made you cutting edge and cloud computing was something meteorologists discussed. Over the years, it had grown through a series of acquisitions and mergers, each one adding new layers of technological complexity without ever bothering to clean up the old ones. The result was a digital Frankenstein's monster, part modern web application, part legacy database system, part mysterious black box that nobody dared touch because the last person who understood it had retired in 2018. My colleagues were a mixed bag of brilliance and burnout. There was Jake Martinez, our junior systems administrator, who had enough energy to power a small city but lacked the experience to channel it effectively. He'd graduated from a coding bootcamp with dreams of revolutionizing enterprise software and had spent the last 2 years slowly realizing that most of enterprise software was held together with the digital equivalent of duct tape and good intentions. Then there was Lisa Chen, our database administrator, who spoke in SQL queries and had an uncanny ability to coax performance out of systems that should have been decommissioned during the Clinton administration. She'd been with the company for 8 years and had developed the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too many data migrations go sideways. Our team was completed by Alex Rodriguez, the security specialist who spent most of his time explaining why various cost-cutting measures were going to get us hacked, and why implementing proper security protocols wasn't optional just because they were inconvenient. He'd joined the company after a stint in government cybersecurity, and you could tell he was still adjusting to the private sector's approach to risk management, which seemed to be ignore it until it becomes someone else's problem. The office itself reflects this philosophy of deferred maintenance. The IT department occupies the basement level of a converted warehouse, where the fluorescent lights flicker with the rhythm of a dying heartbeat and the air conditioning system makes sounds like a dying walrus. My desk sits in the corner, surrounded by towers of outdated equipment that serve as both storage and conversation pieces for the occasional executive who ventures down to see how the magic happens. The basement had originally been designed as storage space, and it showed. Low ceilings meant that anyone over 6 feet tall had to duck around the support beams, and the concrete floors were painted industrial gray, the color of institutional despair. The walls were lined with server racks that hummed constantly, creating a white noise backdrop that either lulled you into productivity or drove you slowly insane, depending on your disposition. My workspace was a monument to making do with what you had. 3 monitors of different sizes and vintages created a curve of glowing screens that displayed everything from real-time network traffic to system logs that scrolled by like digital waterfalls. The keyboard was a mechanical one I'd bought myself after the company-issued membrane keyboard died for the 3rd time, and my chair was an ergonomic model I'd acquired through a complex barter system involving Jake's old gaming chair and Lisa's spare monitor. The coffee machine in our break area was older than some of the interns, and it produced a substance that was technically coffee but tasted like it had been filtered through regret. We kept it running because the alternative was the cafeteria upstairs, where the coffee was somehow even worse and came with the added bonus of having to interact with people from other departments who might ask questions about why their applications were running slowly. 3 weeks ago, I'd submitted my annual training request for a specialized certification in cloud infrastructure management. The course wasn't cheap, $8,500 for a week-long intensive that would have taught me the exact skills needed to modernize our creaking system. I'd spent hours crafting a detailed justification, complete with ROI calculations that would make a finance major weep with joy, risk assessments that outlined exactly what would happen if we didn't upgrade our knowledge base, and a timeline showing how this training would prevent the exact type of cascading failure that had been lurking in our network like a ticking time bomb wrapped in outdated protocols. The request sat on Hammond's desk for 2 weeks, gathering dust between his collection of motivational coffee mugs and a stack of performance reviews that probably hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration. I'd walk past his office daily, watching my carefully crafted proposal become just another piece of paper in his bureaucratic empire, wondering if he'd even bothered to read past the dollar sign. Finally, he called me into his corner office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the parking lot and the motivational posters that nobody found motivating. Hammond was the kind of manager who'd climbed the corporate ladder by saying yes to executives and no to everyone else, perfecting the art of upward delegation while maintaining plausible deniability for any failures below. He had the dead eyes of someone who'd given up on genuine human connection sometime around 2019, replacing empathy with efficiency metrics and personal growth with PowerPoint presentations. Hammond's office was a shrine to middle management mediocrity. The walls were covered with certificates from leadership seminars with names like Synergizing Team Dynamics and Leveraging Human Capital for Maximum ROI. His desk was a monument to organization without purpose, color-coded file folders that contained printed emails, a desktop calendar that duplicated his digital one, and a collection of stress balls that had never been squeezed because admitting to stress would be admitting to weakness. Behind his desk hung a diploma from a business school that specialized in weekend MBA programs for working professionals. The frame was expensive, the kind that screamed, "I paid for this credential and I want everyone to know it." Next to it was a photo of Hammond shaking hands with the CEO at some corporate retreat, both of them wearing the kind of forced smiles that suggested the photographer had taken 17 shots to get one where both parties looked simultaneously engaged and approachable. The motivational posters were particularly galling. Teamwork, because sometimes you can't do it all yourself, hung next to persistence, the hard work you do after you're tired of the hard work you already did. The irony was lost on Hammond, who regularly assigned impossible deadlines and then disappeared for long lunches when the inevitable crisis hit. "Claire," he said, not looking up from his phone where he was apparently engaged in a riveting game of corporate solitaire, "about your training request." I knew from his tone, that particular blend of dismissal and condescension that managers perfect in MBA programs. I'd heard it before, the corporate equivalent of a doctor's grave expression before delivering bad news, except doctors at least have the decency to make eye contact. "It's not mission critical," he continued, finally looking up with the expression of someone who'd just solved world hunger by suggesting people eat less. "Budget's tight this quarter. We need to focus on essential expenses only." I felt that familiar burn in my chest, the one that comes when you're about to watch someone make a spectacularly stupid decision and there's nothing you can do to stop them. It's the same feeling you get watching a horror movie when the protagonist decides to investigate the strange noise in the basement while wearing nothing but a nightgown and flip-flops. I'd been at Sage Tech long enough to know that budget's tight was code for "I already spent the money on something else and now I'm looking for places to cut corners," usually followed by mysterious expenditures on executive retreats and office furniture that cost more than most people's cars. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice level despite the growing urge to explain basic cause and effect using small words and hand gestures, "this isn't just professional development. Our current infrastructure is held together with digital duct tape and the collective hope of everyone who depends on it functioning. When, not if, we have a major outage, I won't have the skills to implement the kind of rapid recovery solutions that modern systems require." Hammond waved a dismissive hand, the same gesture I'd seen him use when employees brought up concerns about workplace safety, reasonable accommodations, or basic human dignity. "You're smart, Claire. You'll figure it out. That's what we pay you for." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife and serve at a dinner party. I wanted to explain that being smart doesn't magically download knowledge into your brain like some kind of cyberpunk fantasy, that expertise requires training, that you can't Google your way out of an enterprise-level disaster any more than you can YouTube your way through open-heart surgery. But I'd learned long ago that trying to educate Hammond was like trying to teach calculus to a houseplant, frustrating for me, pointless for him, and ultimately resulting in the same level of comprehension. Instead, I simply said, "Understood. I'll make note of that in my files." Something in my tone must have registered because he looked up sharply, his corporate spider sense tingling. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that I want to document our conversation for future reference." "Standard practice." His eyes narrowed slightly. Hammond might have been willfully ignorant about technology, but he understood the implications of documented conversations. In the corporate world, documentation is both shield and sword, and everyone knows it. "I don't appreciate the attitude, Claire." "I'm not giving you attitude," I replied, maintaining the same level tone that had served me well through 4 years of corporate nonsense. "I'm acknowledging your decision and following proper protocols." I walked out of his office with my jaw clenched and my hands steady, but inside I was calculating probabilities like a statistics professor on caffeine. Our primary server cluster had been showing warning signs for months, random disconnects that lasted just long enough to make you question your sanity, memory errors that appeared and disappeared like digital ghosts, the kind of hiccups that usually preceded complete system failures. I'd been babying it along with the dedication of a nurse tending to a terminal patient, but I knew it was living on borrowed time. The signs were all there for anyone who cared to look. Error logs that read like a horror novel, performance metrics that would make a cardiologist reach for the defibrillator, and a backup system that was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. I'd filed reports, sent emails, and given presentations that might as well have been interpretive dance for all the attention they received from management. But now I had something else, documentation. A paper trail that would lead directly back to Hammond's office when everything inevitably went sideways. I spent the rest of that afternoon updating my incident reports, cross-referencing dates, and creating a timeline that even a jury of corporate executives would understand. The documentation process was almost therapeutic. I pulled up months of emails, system logs, and incident reports, weaving them together into a narrative that told the story of a system in decline and management's willful ignorance of the warning signs. There were the memory errors that started in March, dismissed as minor glitches. The network timeouts that began in April, explained away as growing pains. The backup failures in May that were labeled isolated incidents. Each piece of evidence was timestamped, cross-referenced, and stored in multiple locations. I created a folder structure that would survive any attempt at digital archaeology, with copies stored on local drives, cloud storage, and even printed backups locked in my desk drawer. If Hammond wanted to play games with accountability, I was going to make sure the playing field was level. Jake noticed me working late that evening, the glow of my monitors casting shadows across the empty office. "Everything okay, Claire? You look like you're preparing for war." "Not war," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Just making sure history gets recorded accurately." He lingered by my desk, young enough to still believe that corporate politics could be avoided through competence alone. "Is this about the training thing? Because that's really messed up. We all know you need that certification." "It's about more than training," I said, finally turning to face him. "It's about what happens when people make decisions based on spreadsheets instead of reality." The truth was, I'd been at Sage Tech long enough to see this pattern repeat itself. Every year, there was some new cost-cutting initiative that sacrificed long-term stability for short-term savings. Equipment replacement got deferred. Software licenses went unrenewed. Training budgets got slashed. And then, inevitably, something would break, and suddenly everyone would be asking why we weren't prepared. The outage happened on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m., Pacific Standard Time. I was in my office, 3 cups of coffee deep in contemplating the existential crisis of debugging code that was older than some of our interns, when every monitoring system I had started screaming at once. It was like being in a digital horror movie where all the warning bells decide to have a coordinated nervous breakdown. Red alerts cascaded across my screens like digital dominoes falling in slow motion. The primary server cluster had finally given up the ghost, taking with it our customer database, internal communications, and half our web services. Error messages multiplied faster than rabbits in springtime, each one more catastrophic than the last. In the old days, this would have been a manageable crisis. I'd have implemented our standard recovery protocols, restored from backups, and had everything running within a few hours while muttering creative obscenities under my breath. But this wasn't the old days anymore. Our infrastructure had evolved into something more complex, more fragmented, more dependent on cloud-based solutions that required specialized knowledge to navigate, the exact kind of specialized knowledge that could be obtained through training that cost $8,500 and was not mission-critical. I did what I could with the tools I had. I restored what I could restore, rerouted what I could reroute, and sent up prayers to whatever digital gods might be listening from their silicon heaven. The legacy systems came back online grudgingly, like teenagers being dragged out of bed on a school morning. But the new cloud architecture that Sage Tech had been gradually migrating to? The one that required the exact certification Hammond had deemed unnecessary? That remained broken, mocking me with error messages that might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian. By noon, we were looking at a complete service outage with no clear timeline for recovery. The executives were in full panic mode, fielding angry calls from clients and watching dollar signs evaporate in real time like money in a Vegas casino. The customer service department had given up answering phones, and the sales team was hiding in the break room like witnesses to a crime. The cascade of failures was spectacular in its completeness. Our main customer portal displayed a generic error message that might as well have said "We're sorry, but we've forgotten how to computer." The internal communication system was down, leaving employees to communicate through personal cell phones and hastily created group chats. The accounting system was offline, which meant we couldn't process payments or generate invoices. Even the cafeteria's point-of-sale system was affected, leading to the surreal sight of executives paying for their panic lunches with actual cash. I could hear the chaos from my basement office. Footsteps thundering overhead, muffled shouting, and the occasional slam of a door that suggested someone was having a very bad day. My phone had been ringing constantly until I'd finally unplugged it, deciding that I needed to focus on fixing the problem rather than explaining it to increasingly frantic managers. The irony wasn't lost on me that in a building full of people whose jobs depended on functioning technology, I was the only one who actually understood what was broken. The executives upstairs were probably holding emergency meetings about crisis management strategies, while I was down here trying to perform digital surgery with outdated tools. Lisa appeared at my desk around 1 p.m., looking like she'd been running a marathon in business casual. "How bad is it?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Remember that scene in Titanic where the ship's designer explains that the ship will sink because too many compartments are flooded?" I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Yeah. We're the ship." "And me?" I was exactly where I'd expected to be, in the middle of a crisis I'd predicted but been prevented from preparing for, watching my professional reputation hang in the balance because someone had decided that expertise was optional. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket, made heavier by the knowledge that this entire situation could have been prevented with a single training course and a manager who understood the difference between cost and value. That's when Hammond burst through my office door like a one-man hurricane, his face cycling through shades of red I hadn't seen since my last bad sunburn. He moved with the kind of frantic energy that suggested he'd been receiving phone calls from people whose names appeared on organizational charts with boxes drawn around them. "Claire," he shouted, loud enough that half the IT department probably heard him through the paper-thin walls. "Why didn't you fix the outage? We're losing thousands of dollars every hour." I turned in my chair slowly, savoring the moment like a fine wine. There's something beautiful about watching consequences catch up with poor decisions, especially when you've been forced to watch those decisions being made despite your best efforts to prevent them. "I'm doing everything I can with the resources available to me," I said, gesturing to the screens full of error messages that looked like a digital Christmas tree decorated with failure. "That's not good enough. This is your job." "You're absolutely right," I said, pulling up my email from 2 weeks earlier with the satisfaction of a lawyer producing evidence. "This is exactly the kind of situation I mentioned when I requested training for cloud infrastructure management. The training you canceled because it wasn't mission critical." The color drained from his face as the implications hit him like a freight train carrying a cargo of reality checks. You could practically see the gears turning in his head, grinding against each other like machinery that hadn't been properly maintained. "You're saying you can't fix this?" "I'm saying I can't fix this optimally. I can implement workarounds, but without the specialized knowledge that training would have provided, we're looking at extended downtime and potential data integrity issues." Hammond's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, which was probably the most accurate metaphor for his current situation. Behind him, I could see other IT staff gathering in the hallway, drawn by the commotion and probably enjoying the show like spectators at a particularly dramatic sporting event. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, his voice cracking slightly. "You should be able to handle this without specialized training." "Should I?" I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. "Because 2 weeks ago, you seemed to think this kind of expertise wasn't important enough to invest in. Has something changed about the nature of reality since then?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, filled with the ambient noise of failing systems and the distant sound of customer service representatives crying softly into their headsets. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he realized he'd painted himself into a corner using the finest brushes of corporate short-sightedness. "Well, can't you just figure it out?" he asked, his voice taking on the desperate tone of someone who'd just realized they'd brought a butter knife to a gunfight. "I am figuring it out," I replied. "But figuring it out without proper training is like performing surgery with kitchen utensils. Technically possible, but messy, inefficient, and likely to result in complications." The outage lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of lost revenue, angry customers, and executives asking very pointed questions about our disaster recovery capabilities. 18 hours of me explaining to increasingly frustrated clients that yes, we were aware of the problem, and no, we couldn't provide a specific timeline for resolution because we were essentially performing digital archaeology on systems that predated the concept of proper documentation. I eventually managed to get most services restored using a combination of old-school troubleshooting, creative problem-solving, and the kind of digital wizardry that comes from years of experience with systems that should have been retired during the Bush administration. But it was messy, inefficient, and exactly the kind of amateur-hour operation that proper training would have prevented. The next morning, I found a training approval form on my desk. Not just for the cloud certification I'd originally requested, but for 2 additional courses Hammond thought might be beneficial for the team. The irony wasn't lost on me. What had been not mission critical on a Tuesday was suddenly essential by Thursday, like a weather forecast that changes completely based on whether you're already standing in the rain. I signed the forms, but I also updated my resume. Because while Hammond had learned his lesson about the value of investing in his team's capabilities, I'd learned something too. I was working for someone who only understood the importance of expertise after watching its absence nearly destroy the company. That's not leadership, that's just expensive hindsight. The training, when I finally took it, was everything I'd expected and more. The instructor, a grizzled veteran of countless corporate disasters, spent the first day explaining exactly why the kind of outage we'd experienced was preventable with proper preparation. It was like having a doctor explain how a heart attack could have been avoided with basic preventive care, enlightening, but also deeply frustrating. 3 months later, I gave my notice. The exit interview was conducted by Hammond himself, and when he asked why I was leaving, I told him the truth. I realized I need to work somewhere that values mission-critical thinking before it becomes mission-critical. His response was predictably corporate. "We're sorry to lose you, Claire. You're a valuable member of the team." If I was truly valuable, I replied, you would have invested in keeping me current with industry standards instead of waiting for a crisis to prove my worth. These days, I'm at a company that not only approves my training requests but actively encourages professional development. It's amazing what happens when leadership understands that investing in your people isn't just good business, it's the only way to stay ahead of the curve in an industry where the curve moves faster than most people can keep up. My new manager, Jennifer, actually reads my training proposals before approving them. She asks questions about implementation timelines and knowledge transfer. She understands that expertise isn't just about having smart people, it's about having smart people who are equipped with current knowledge and relevant skills. And Hammond? I heard through the grapevine that Sage Tech Co. had another major outage 6 months after I left. Apparently, my replacement didn't have the institutional knowledge to handle it either, and the training Hammond had finally approved was sitting unused because they couldn't afford to lose anyone else during the recovery period. Funny how that works. Sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one you refuse to learn until it's too late.